Now, I don't know about you, but everything UFOs, aliens, ancient astronaut theorists, whatever you want to call them, it all captivates me deeply. And naturally, I wanted to talk about it on this show. I wasn't sure where to start because the lore goes so deep, right? Some people would say it's hundreds of years. Some people would say it goes back thousands of years. So I figured, okay, let's zoom out a little and let's start it off simple. So how would your boomer grandfather be introduced to this subject? And that would happen to be the incident that we're going to be covering today, known as the Betty and Barney Hill incident. One of the most famous cases in ufology, and arguably the one that had the most cultural impact and what started the UFO frenzy in the 1960s, at least within the American psyche. So, the year was 1961. Betty and Barney Hill, one of them worked for the US Postal Service and the other was just a social worker. What was interesting about these guys at the time was that they were an interracial couple, which was a rarity in the US. So right off the bat,
that is interesting to me. It's uncommon to be an interracial couple at that time, but it's also even more uncommon to be an interracial couple that's abducted by aliens. So they should have played the lottery shortly after this one. So there was maybe they saw that going on and they thought, well, that's strange. I haven't seen that one yet. And looking at humans, let's abduct them.
Some of the viewers might think that's a strange thing to focus on, but I wanted to bring that up because of the cultural impact this had. I genuinely think them being an interracial couple during this time was part of the reason why it was at the forefront of American media. Because, people did care about that stuff a bit more. So anyways, it should also be noted that Barney was a board member at the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, anyways, they went on holiday to Niagara Falls in Montreal, and they were on their way back from what I hope was a lovely time. And they were driving back, right? It was about 10:30 p.m. It was September 19th, 1961. And they were in an area, Lancaster, New Hampshire, and Betty was looking out the window, and she noticed a strange light in the sky. And at first, she thought it was a falling star or something. But the light started behaving really erratically. Like, it wasn't a falling star. Kind of moves downwards, right? This one is moving upwards and like getting bigger and smaller. And she brought it to Barney's attention, and at first he thought it was a star or maybe a plane. He has some military history as well, by the way, so he took the pragmatic approach. He's like, maybe it's like a plane, or maybe it's some military thing being tested, like an aircraft. It started behaving more and more erratically and like kind of zipping around like a ping pong, as UFOs supposedly do, and it started getting bigger. So she instructed Barney to stop by so they could take a closer look and also walk their dog. So they stopped near Twin Mountain, and they brought with them some binoculars. They're taking a walk, and Barney was taking a close look with his binoculars. And he went into it thinking that it was going to be like an aeroplane or something. But then, upon a closer inspection, it was a traditional flying saucer. Lights all over it, kind of rotating. And it was like moving faster and faster towards them, which kind of startled him. So he ran back to his car at this point, and like he went to grab his gun, like just in case.
So, real quick, something I wanted to point out here. Two things. I didn't know there was this much buildup to them seeing it. I thought that they were driving down the road and it popped up all of a sudden, and that was it. And then all of a sudden they woke up and it was the next day, or they'd somehow have some sort of amnesia associated with it. I didn't know that there was this much going into it, that they had already identified it, were kind of perplexed, did a little bit of small investigating on their part. And the other thing is that when you say the UFO noticed them and went towards them, that's an adage that's in a lot of anecdotal UFO accounts, where these people, usually when you look up in the air, you see a plane, this plane doesn't acknowledge your existence. This plane doesn't know that you're down there looking at it. But for some reason, and you, the narrator, may have had experience with this in your own life. Sometimes people say that they felt this craft was aware of them. They could feel that it was observing them and was aware of what they were doing. It's almost as if it knows that you're looking at it. And maybe that's part of the reason why they're so hard to spot. And there isn't a lot of evidence for them, because they're kind of cognizant in some strange way we can't define of who's looking at them and who's observing them. Also, just to kind of put it into the mainstream zeitgeist, wasn't there a popular movie called Nope that came out recently where the UFO craft was an organism in itself? There's nothing inside of it.
Yep, it was the creature.
Yeah, so just kind of cognizant, alive, we should say, craft being able to observe and interact with people. This isn't something that's new. It's been around for a while, and when you said that now that it was happening to Betty and Barney Hill, it kind of reminded me of that. So that's interesting. But Gary,
sure. So it should also be noted, Betty's sister had recently also told her about some kind of flying saucer thing in the news. So just the idea of flying saucers was already there in Betty's mind. So anyways, they got back to their car and they continued driving onwards. And they saw the craft kind of flying around the mountain for some reason. It seemed quite focused on that. But near the Indian Head, wherever that is, the object descended like really close to their car. Like it was just like right above them. They could see it quite clearly. That caused them to freak out a little bit. And at this point, car stopped again. And then Barney stepped out with his pistol and his binoculars. And, took out his binoculars, and then he just looked straight at the craft, like right above them. And he claims that he saw figures in the craft, and that he received a telepathic message within his mind to stay where he is. And then after that, they don't remember anything.
That it's interesting you say that, and that's a common trope that's in a lot of these stories as well. Is that, when I was talking about the communication earlier, when you're thinking of your Mount Rushmore of UFO encounters, one of them is also Rendlesham Forest incident, which I'm sure we'll talk about at another point, where he felt like there was almost a full diagram and coded language kind of injected into his psyche that he could transcribe later from interacting with some very strange looking, slightly humanoid floating craft in the woods. This is kind of remind me of that. He saw these aliens and felt like they were interacting with him psychically, which is common. And I think it's interesting when it comes up in these stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like Megatron with the glasses in the Michael Bay Transformers movie.
What happens in that?
Sam's grandfather was traveling the Arctic Circle, and then he fell into a hole and found Megatron.
Oh, okay.
And then it planted some messages in his brain.
Oh,
anyway,
okay. Yeah, it's coming back to me. You're right. I actually remember that now. Sorry.
It's a great movie, by the way.
Of course. Stands up.
Okay. So anyways, at that point, their minds, they just couldn't remember anything. So what happened? Well, the immediate after effects involved them arriving home at dawn, 7 hours after they'd left wherever they left.
Lost when the
journey. Yeah, and the journey should have taken 3 hours. This is important for later. Mm-hmm. So when they got home, they were experiencing these what they described as like unexplainable impulses and sensations within their body, and along with that, their watches stopped working. Barney noticed his shoe had been scraped, and the strap on his binoculars had been torn a little bit. And then on Betty's side, her dress was kind of messed up or something. And this one I find kind of funny. Barney felt really compelled to check his dick. Sorry, I don't know why I said it like that, but like he just felt really, really compelled to inspect his genitals. So he went into the shower. Had a
phallic
really
investigation. Yeah, any man would.
Naturally. They both took really long showers to contemplate the whole situation, the kind of dissociated state that they were in. Maybe to ease the anxiety or something, I don't know. And they were also, they also felt like they felt a need to take their clothes off and check for contamination. So like they took their clothes off and they put it in like a bag and like stored it away, and like they don't know why they needed to do that, but they did it. Like they felt that was an important step to take. And then they sketched their observations or something, noted it down. But anyway, so later on, they discussed the event with the authorities, and talked to some of the military guys. They heard out their story. Didn't get much out from it. I mean, the guys in the other end were interested and were like taking notes and like, okay. They were acknowledging some of the minor uncertainties, but other than that, nothing happened for a while. Until a few days later, Betty started to have some dreams about the incident. She noted down that they were really, really vivid. The most vivid, most intensive dreams she's ever had in her life. And this went on for 5 consecutive nights, and she was just kind of re-experiencing parts of what supposedly happened when they were approached by this ship.
Repressed memories from what was happening on there.
Exactly. So they sought psychological help because sorry, I should have mentioned. So the missing time element was really starting to like worry them. So at this point they sought psychological help because, for those that don't know, during the 1960s, hypnosis was actually a really common practice in psychology. And one of the things that hypnosis would be used for was to recover lost memories, because it's quite common for traumatic events to kind of have like your memories completely blanked as like a kind of protective measure. And at the very least, Barney was conscious of the fact that this was a real phenomenon, that like memories could disappear. Sorry, you can say something?
I just think it's funny because it's kind of the Rosetta Stone for not only paranormal discussion in general, but UFOs and alien abduction cases. But Mulder in X-Files, in a few episodes, wants to figure out something that's happened to him when he may or may not have been abducted, and he goes through this regressive hypnotherapy to try and figure it out, and he almost loses a part of himself in that. It's very advanced and dangerous procedure, the way it's portrayed in the show. I'm sure it's not in real life, but the scientific merits of it and psychological merits of it aren't quite there in a way that's passable, but that's not what we're here for, right? I mean, we're here for a good story. But I just think it's interesting that is a mainstay in the abduction kind of circuit, is the concept of hypnotherapy and repressed thoughts from abductions.
I do find it interesting how hypnosis is, like, even to this day, psychologists will at the very least acknowledge it as something real, but for some reason it's it's crazy to say that something like mind control is not real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it could be. It's funny. It's like you can define what it is, but you can't explain it in the same way as deja vu works. A lot of people experience deja vu. It's an observable phenomenon, at least personally, but the exact explanation of why it occurs isn't exactly known yet, which I think is great. It's good to have that mystery in life.
Mm-hmm. So, 1964, a few years later, this was the year they sought a hypnotherapy. They sought a psychologist before, I think, just talking about the experiences, but they didn't get into hypnosis until later. One of the most famous hypnotists in America, Dr. Benjamin Simon, and they made some interesting discoveries. So they were hypnotized separately, and under hypnosis, they recounted really similar stories about being taken aboard the craft that was floating above them. What's interesting about this is that Barney's recollections were really emotional, and he was almost entirely focused on how terrified he was during the abduction, how much he was freaking out, how he was crying, he thought he was going to die. And Betty, on the other hand, was relatively calm, and she was almost enjoying the experience, kind of letting the wonder take over her, or at the very least not freaking out quite as much.
That's interesting. It's almost like there was a feminine spiritualism for it in her that she could extract something from, and as a man, it's illogical, right? So he was having a hard time he's having a hard time, making sense of it.
Yeah, you might be onto something there. So anyway, they recounted similar stories, but had distinctly different experiences, so to speak, at least emotionally. So what went down? Well, when you combine the stories together, supposedly this is what happened. So when Barney was looking through his binoculars, and he was told to just stop where he was, the ship descended further, and then a kind of a ladder, or like this telescopic ramp, let's say, kind of made its way down, and the shadows of all but one of the shadows of the figures in the window kind of walked away. And while one kept watching Barney through his binoculars, they started descending down the ramp and approached the two. And they're described as having grayish skin, large eyes, big head, the typical grey alien.
Yeah.
They were wearing...
They were wearing something?
Yeah, this is what I find hilarious. They were wearing what seemed to be like a black suit, and this is the funny one. They were wearing hats. Like they said, there are hats that were reminiscent of like hats worn in the military, like a beret.
Tourists, maybe. You know what? This is really, and this is something we'll talk about a lot on this show, is it sounds to me that, okay, just at face value, a lot of people theorize that abductions were a cover-up for the government experimenting on people and having an excuse to do that. When you say they may have hallucinated people in military uniforms or having military hats on or wearing suits, it almost kind of reminds me of that there may be a chance that they use UFOs as a facade to drug and induce people into states where they can experiment on them. And with the heightened civil rights tension and the condition of their relationship, race-wise, there could be a reason why they were suspect by the government and experimented on at some point. And I don't know if that ever came up in the narrative for this specific story, but it's a pervasive one throughout abduction lore, obviously.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So upon seeing these figures and what was going on, Barney, understandably, started freaking out. So he and Betty returned to I think Betty was still in the car. He was just out there with the binocular and the pistol. He ran back to his car and he started driving away, and the UFO followed them. But then they started hearing like a kind of buzzing sound, like a humming in that car. It's like maybe the car started vibrating or something, but they heard a sound. It was in their mind. And all of a sudden, Barney felt compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. And he eventually pulled up and saw 6 of these beings standing on the dirt road. And then the car stalled. And then 3 of them approached the car. And then, supposedly...
they got carjacked by gray aliens in hats.
According to him, they stared into his eyes with like a terrifying and mesmerizing effect, and he was straight up pooping himself.
Yes, I do remember hearing about this. Okay,
this is what Barney said for word during the hypnotherapy session. I'm gonna try my best at doing a 1960s voice. Oh, those eyes, they're in my brain.
That's good. Pop sci-fi kind of impression there.
Yeah, so yeah, these terrifying eyes are just tormenting him. So he went blank. Betty, on the other hand, was relatively chill, and they were taken aboard the ship. And in the ship, they were kind of having an investigation done on their body, just the usual kind of stuff, skin, scrapings of their skin, that kind of thing.
I do love in these stories when there's more than observing a UFO, when they actually have some sort of, whether it be too fanciful to believe or not, but some type of either, just say, mental or kind of psycho interaction with them physically in front of them that they can kind of try to describe later. I think there's something spiritual and mythical about that, and the interactions are always really undefinable. It's never I said hello to the alien, and the alien said hello to me. How do you do, sir? Instead, the stories kind of they're elevated in some sense, and I don't want to say fictionalized, but the more interactions that we're not used to human to human. It's more, I felt him reaching into my eyes and seeing what I was seeing, or he was communicating to me telepathic in this nature, and he wasn't exactly saying anything, but I knew what he was saying, and it wasn't a language I understood, but I could understand it. And I kind of like that there's some mystery around the way that they communicate with us, and it's almost ethereal. It's dreamlike in some ways when they, you know.
So Barney wasn't actually familiar with the term telepathy at the time. So he described their communication as thought transference, which is, I think that's quite interesting.
It's a militaristic way of saying it, so that makes sense. And he was in the military. Yeah, that's interesting.
So, but what? Yeah, so they described them speaking in like a kind of mumbly language that they didn't understand. But for the most part, it was telepathy.
Mumble rapper aliens. Sorry.
Yeah, but Betty actually had a conversation with the quote-unquote leader in English, but we'll get onto that later.
Oh goodness, okay.
So yeah, they were undergoing some kind of physical examination, and the funniest thing to me, and it's not funny at all, it's actually horrifying if you put yourself in his shoes, but as Barney was completely and utterly freaking out, they took his underwear off. They took out his pee-pee, right, and they put a tube inside it.
Let's go.
And like,
apparently through his urethra or whatever?
Yes, basically.
Oh,
right in his dick hole. Yeah. So you should understand with being in pain.
Yeah, enough with the telepathy and the contactless communication. It's going right up.
Let's get down to business, boy.
Yeah, let's go.
So like, understand that he was in pain, and like the alien understood this. So like, kind of like waved its hand, or like looked into his eyes, and the pain disappeared. And then
he's like, you should have done that in the first place.
And then they like looked deeply into his eyes. then he came.
Then he ejaculated. You're right. Okay.
Let's fucking go.
just picture this, right? You're freaking out. An alien pulls you down onto a bed, takes your underwear off, shoves a tube in your dick, and looks you deeply in the eye.
This is some sort of blaxploitation, early 70s film trope where there's an intergalactic species that wants to use the, masculine seed of a powerful black man on Earth to spread throughout the galaxy. That's the impression I'm getting from a bit of this story. But
it's
sorry to get cinematic with it.
Maybe they're just like investigating human gametes or something.
Okay.
So something similar was done to Betty as well. You could extrapolate from that where you will. Like, I don't know, maybe they went through the VV or something.
Try to see if the eggs were working. Yep.
Exactly. Similar kind of thing went on over there. And then Barney doesn't recollect much after this, I don't think. And then Betty, on the other hand, she was having a good time. She actually got up and started talking to the leader. He started talking back in English, and they were talking about like what's going on, what's space and all that. And apparently the guy she was talking to was saying, "Oh, you wouldn't even believe me if I told you," like in a kind of monotone way. And she was like asking questions, and the alien presented to her a star map.
Okay,
about,
I remember this.
From.
Okay,
this and he also I say he, I don't know what gender, what pronouns this alien uses. Sure. Are we doing this? Pronouns for the aliens?
Yeah, right.
And then it was swiftly taken away from her again. Like, gave her a book.
What are you looking at? Like, you can't look at that anymore.
Like, I think he wanted her to keep it, but like, no, you can't give it to a human.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
That's so funny. The star map. Okay.
So yeah, she took a look at it, and this is important for later on. So yeah, that happened. Memory wiped, and then they found themselves at home. 7 hours had gone by. It was a 3-hour journey. What happened? The next day, they took a look at the clothes. Again, the one that they'd stored away. There were tears in Betty's dress, but and most notably, there was a pink powder on there, which was strange to her. But for some reason, she still hung up the clothes to dry in the air or something. And then the pink powder was brushed away. And then she was like, wait, why did I do that? That's really stupid of me. They should go for like forensic analysis or something. So
she must have felt dumb
again,
after the fact there, yeah.
Yeah, so then the clothes are like sent off to like 5 different laboratories or something to undergo forensic analysis. And I don't think there's anything known about that, at least publicly. Yeah, so the year is still 1964. 1965 came around. And this is when they took their story to the public. It was a phenomenon. There was a frenzy. They were asking her about this star map. So they had her draw it. And what's interesting about this, she drew a star map that was near identical to the Zeta Reticuli constellation, which at the time, I'm not sure if at the time it was known or not, but at least years later, someone connected the two and found that, yeah, her drawing is basically the Zeta Reticuli star system. And if you're unfamiliar with alien lore or ufology in general, it's said that the quintessential grey alien originates from this star system, and it's a binary star system, 2 stars, and then there's like habitable planets, like I think like 2 surrounding each of them. So this is relevant because this was in the 60s, but like many years later, Bob Lazar would come out and he'd start talking about that very same star system.
Well, this reminds me, and you want to talk about UFO circuit personalities. He's not specifically one, but David Icke, in one of his books.
Oh, yeah.
Dimensions of the Matrix. I'm doing an anagram of the word title. Who knows what it is? But he was talking about how there were, I don't want to say, the Zulu tribesmen or some sort of shamanic tribe that was already able to map out and be aware of, I can't remember the star system like I used to, Zeta Reticuli or Alpha Centauri, before
I think it was
we had
Alpha
actually
Centauri.
discovered. Yeah, that sounds a little more for they were able to figure out that existed, or in some way be aware of it through some type of celestial map that they put together before normal organizations with the actual tools to be able to figure it out, that they do indeed exist. So this kind of reminds me of that, though, where Betty, she's unaware of where the star system is. I'm sure she doesn't know, and I don't think she has any prior experience in it, but she's able to come close after seeing some sort of intergalactic map after alien encounter. That's pretty interesting.
When I say the map was identical, I mean you can't mistake it.
So it was that close.
It was that close. She drew the stars, like notably the two stars in the binary star system, and then the lines following the different stars near them, and like drew the lines for the constellation. It was that accurate. It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
I think the thing you're talking about, the tribe, I think they also had something where it was like they calculated the length of an Earth day more accurately, or like with more decimal values than what was known at the time within known physics, science.
Wow.
Science would be. And people would love to say that, like, oh yeah, they're just that small, and like the Mayans as well, they all figured it out on their own. But I mean, there's also that other like prevailing hypothesis that there was some kind of alien intervention, in ancient human history. Because of course the pyramids as well. That's the biggest one. They're aligned with Orion's belt.
We'll touch. That is interesting, and we'll touch on that a lot. But it also goes hand in hand. You don't even need to look as far back as ancient tribes and what they may or may not have known being exceeding expectations of the time. But even now, people love to talk about the technological leaps we've had in the last 50 years being unlike anything we've seen before. Compared to the entire history of humanity, it's unheard of. And people like to say there was some sort of extraterrestrial intervention, supposedly from Roswell, that made that happen. And we've been able to kind of build on that technology because we would have never thought of it on our own. That almost goes back to ancient star systems that tribes may have been able to put together as, hey, that they could have had some help. I don't think that's that foreign of a concept, and I don't think it's a disrespectful one to talk about.
No, not at all. And I think it's an interesting idea to see like how much of what we know wasn't necessarily discovered as much as it was rediscovered. You know what I mean?
Passed down. Yeah, rediscovered. And then you're getting into the entire concept of previous civilizations that may be unrecorded, and we'll get into a lot of those classics too at some point.
We will. So yeah, that's about it. So I'm really sorry that like the structure of all of these events are kind of messy. It's just an amalgamation of everything, really.
There's a really good catalog of there's good cataloging and documentation of their story, what happened, and the public reaction to it. And I think that's a lot to get. That's more than you would typically get from a UFO abduction story. And I like that these people didn't have backgrounds that were adjacent to UFOs or an unidentified phenomenon. I don't know. They weren't scientists. They weren't, let's say, creatives, literary creatives. They weren't involved with pulp sci-fi that may have been popular at the time. They were just normal people with normal careers that experienced something extraordinary and wanted to get to the bottom of it. And I don't think their stories are. Sometimes they sound really exaggerated when you hear some of them, and then the alien told me about the history of civilization and told me the truth of life and what the key to life is, and that's why I came back to tell all of you. They didn't seem to be going at it from an angle, right? They didn't seem to look for the benefit to them. They just wanted to understand it honestly, and that's the impression I get from the story. I think that's interesting. But to me, as you're telling it, it really does sound like a government experiment on suggestive therapy, drugging, and just human psychology, studying it in general, what you can have someone recall, not recall. Can you have some sort of Manchurian candidate type patient who is able to memorize a complicated map that they normally wouldn't be able to because you've programmed their brain in such a way that they can? A lot of it feels like a purposeful human abduction as opposed to a UFO one, but obviously that's just conjecture on my part. Yeah, yes.
So there's something to be said
interracial
about
couple
that.
beta testing.
There is something to be said about that, but real quick, I find this interesting. I like the juxtaposition of Betty and Barney as a couple. This is besides the whole interracial thing. How like Betty's like a kind of relatively open-minded, kind of free-thinking.
Star Child.
Right, that kind of thing. And then Barney he's on record as like a really high IQ, like military guy, like something like 140,
highly analytical,
150
right?
Or something. Yeah. So he's like taking a really pragmatic, like rational approach to everything. And I do find it interesting that is how I'd imagine someone like a really analytical, rational person to react to such like world shattering, like,
it would confuse them, depress them, make them a little angry. Right. They can't make sense of it, Meanwhile, women are very present-minded. They're able to capture ephemeral situations, they're along for the ride in a lot of ways. Men aren't built that way.
Military guy,
different.
Relatively well-adjusted, in control of most of his life, and never really felt a sense of like, okay, this is just completely ridiculous, and like I have no response to this. I'm not trained for this. I don't have any analytical basis to respond to this situation. And that's like from a psychoanalytical standpoint, I can see that's why he had a complete and utter meltdown. Because like, what do you do? This is like this kind of stimulus it's completely foreign to his mind. So he kind of resorts to a very primal kind of instinctual panic, like a deer in headlights, prey to a predator, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I find that interesting.
That's a good way of putting it, especially when you said someone that's in control his entire life suddenly has no control and has a tube stuck up his penis and then forced to ejaculate. That would be jarring for anyone, whether they liked being in control or not.
So, which that was me.
I wonder when he took that shower and he was looking at his pee-pee, he was like, damn, my dick hole looks bigger than usual.
Yeah. That was the old post abduction dick hole inspection. So I know where I'm looking the first time I ever feel like I have one. So, but that's not what this story's about, right?
No. And so the hypnosis thing you were talking about earlier, there is another consensus about hypnosis that and this is what's often used. This is what's often used to refute the story. But hypnosis can also be used to inject memories into people. We also see more of this in MK Ultra, of course, but like that's a thing as well. Like, yeah, maybe the hypnotherapist was in on this somehow. Maybe he was. I mean, he was a very famous one. He was big name, and
yeah, and it makes you wonder how he got to that point. But
exactly,
it's a different story for a different time. And Ari, I enjoyed the way you laid this out, because it's a common UFO story, but being able to dissect it, discuss it, and compare it to future cases, and what's mostly discussed within kind of just discourse around UFOs and abductions. It's fun. It's fun to kind of take a second look at it. So
the cultural impact of this event, it can't be understated. The US went into an absolute frenzy. Like, when you see aliens in the media, it's based on this event. This is where it came from.
I can believe that, and I think it's another chapter in the book of kind of finding the root of why we think aliens look the way they do or communicate the way they do. Why are they gray with beady eyes? Why do they telepathically communicate? How tall are they? Are they short? What do they ride? And this story is kind of another part of that chapter, and it's a big part of it. Maybe some would say the biggest, right? So this kind of informed the way that, like you said, pop culture kind of portrayed aliens and UFOs too in movies and shows. So interesting stuff. So thanks for taking me along on the ride without violating my hole. And until next time, we'll see what's behind the scary door.